The Zora Neale Hurston Trust presents the It's All About Zora series. We'll be discussing all things Zora with artists, academics, and fans of Zora Neale Hurston on the It's All About Zora series. Plus, we will uncover her influences on our guests' lives and work. So let's get the conversation started. Monica, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about all things Zora.
Thank you for having me, Ray. You know, we love to talk about Zora.
Absolutely. So, Monica, where did it start for you? Did Zora find you or did you find her?
The first time where I really connected with Zora Neale Hurston, it might have been, I'm going to say this is kind of maybe terrible to say. It might have been graduate school. When I was in graduate school, I remember taking a class on the Harlem Renaissance, and that was not the first time that I read Their Eyes Are Watching God, but it was the first time that I really understood what was happening in that text, right? And I mean that from both a kind of from the perspective of a literary scholar, like I really understand what was happening there with the form of the text and how extraordinary Hurston's achievement was in that book. But it was also the first time that I think I was old enough, maybe, right? And to really understand the kind of relational politics of the book in a way that really touched me, like the relationship between the women in the book, between Janie and Phoebe, between Janie and her grandmother, like when I really felt those relationships in a kind of mature way. So I think it was, I feel like Hurston arrived for me at that time, even though I had read her before that.
Wow, and you truly should not feel bad about saying that. I didn't read a Zora book until 2018. And Barracoon was the first
Was your
one.
first?
Yeah, yeah, I know. Dr. Kendi is always like, that is amazing that you just
Yes,
basically have been introduced to Zora. And like you, I heard her name before. In fact, Their Eyes Are Watching God was assigned in high school in my AP English class. And I did not read the book. Instead, I had my big sister give me the Cliff Notes version, and I had to write an essay as an assignment, and I was able to do that. But I think everybody finds Zora, she finds you when you're ready. And like you said, we just did a book club on Their Eyes Are Watching God, and just the insights, folks were saying that they had read the book 6 and 7 times.
exactly. Yeah.
Somebody said 30 times, and I was like, okay, I got to catch up. But every time you read it, you get something different.
And I mean, I do think, like I said before, I'd read the book before, but I didn't understand it in the same way. And I feel like when I was in high school, what I read was not Hurston, but Alice Walker, right? So in high school, I had been introduced to Alice Walker, and it was almost, I mean, it might have even been through Alice Walker that I got to Hurston. You know, Alice Walker is a great preparation for Hurston if you're going back in time, but I still think I didn't quite get it. And I think it's also because personally, I'm from a very different place than Hurston is. I grew up in the Northeast, right? I mean, I'm just like, nothing about Hurston's environment, right? I mean, I come from a very not all black place, right? So I think there was so much about Hurston that for me that was not familiar, right? And I felt like in some ways I needed a little bit of preparation, both in terms of reading around in African American literature, but also just sort of personal maturity.
Wow, that's a big statement. Personal maturity. Folks will often ask me, do I regret that I didn't read Their Eyes Are Watching God at high school? And I always say no, because I think I would have been like you. I was not mature enough to understand, but also there was this missing element. And I understand why it happens in the classroom, but I needed to understand Zora and
Mhm.
who she was and what she was seeking to do, I think, before I grappled with trying to read in dialect, right? Which I had spent 10 years or 10 grades being taught out of speaking that way. And so, yeah, meeting her did it for me.
Right.
So, you get to teach Zora
I
all the
do.
time
I
at
do.
Barnard College. What is that like?
Oh, it's such a privilege. And it was not something that I anticipated. So when I first started teaching here, I didn't really understand when I first came here that this was Hurston's alma mater and that, as a person who studies African American literature, that I was like in a kind of, sacred space, honestly, in relationship to Hurston and also to Langston Hughes, who spent some time at Columbia across the street. Right. So in terms of thinking about the Harlem Renaissance and their relationships to that time and to one of the first, not the only, but right, one of the first flowerings of African American literature and culture, I didn't anticipate what that would mean to sort of step into the space. But once I got here, I was like, wow, I felt an immediate desire, but also an immediate responsibility to teach Hurston, right? To teach Hurston in context. I mean, to really think about not only Hurston and Harlem, but Hurston right here on campus, right? And to really think through with other students what that experience was like. Like, what was it like for her to be a student here, by day, right? And in a Harlem literary salon by night? Like, what was that like, and to be the only Black student at that time and to be negotiating these different environments, that was something that really piqued my curiosity and I really wanted to know more about it and I really wanted to explore it with other people, right? I mean, we talk about code switching, right, in African American culture, in all cultures, right, when we're moving between cultures. And I just felt that the code switching that she must have done, right, and that so many of us do to be in these environments was something that I really wanted to sort of explore and think about.
And I think that's so beautiful, framing the campus as sacred, being in this sacred space.
She
You know,
was
I think
here.
yeah. I turn into a little kid sometimes whenever I get to go somewhere that Zora was, and I'm imagining her, walking the halls or walking
Yes.
the streets and been in a couple of her houses I've been lucky to go into. And it's like it makes her real all over again. But really, even like you said, Langston Hughes being across the street, it makes the Harlem Renaissance real in a completely different way. And having a privilege to be on Barnard's campus earlier this year. I'll say I can imagine being there every day. I can't get any work done because it does feel like sacred space. And with Harlem being right down the street, two worlds so close
So close
to each
and
other.
so far. Yes.
Yeah, and still so far, and you're moving in and out, just as you said. So I have to ask, what has the students' responses been like when you're like, Zora was here, she was a student just like you. What have some of their responses been?
Barnard students have really varied responses to Zora's presence here. Like, unlike me, some of them have read her, six, seven, eight, nine times before they come to campus as high school students, but also on their own. I had a student named Zora whose mother, as soon as she was old enough, put a copy of Hurston in her hands, right? And it was like, you are named after this person. I want you to know who she is, what she did, and what she accomplished. So when she came into my class, we were very, just aware, right, of the generational legacies of the way that mothers, Black mothers have passed down to, or any mothers, right? Not just, I mean, this is the thing. All of my students, I have students of all races and ethnicities coming in with their copy of Hurston, to be honest. So some of them are really familiar with Hurston, right, and come here and are interested in Barnard for that reason, right? I have other students, again, who are really experiencing or reading Hurston for the first time when they're in one of my Harlem Renaissance classes, but they know that she's an alum and they know a little bit about the story, but they don't know everything. But everyone's curious, right? And one of the things that I've been really wanting to do lately, and particularly in relationship to the summit, right, is everybody quotes Hurston around here, right? I want everyone to read Hurston around here. So that's one of the things that we're really hoping to do over the next couple of years is to make sure that Hurston is really being read and discussed and talked about, because so many of the issues that she brings up in her work, right, are issues that we're still working on and working with and working through now. So she provides an incredible, I mean, it's hard not to think of her in terms of garden metaphors, right? But she provides this incredible sort of, landscape for us to range around in, right? And to really talk about things that matter.
Absolutely. And I have to tell you, even though my son named my children's book Zora's Garden, that same garden visual and Alice Walker, of course, helped with that in Search of Our Mother's Gardens. But it's so true. And I think about, I'm a gardener because of Zora. You think about every year is a little bit different, right? And some of the things change. And it's no matter how many times you plant tomatoes, every year your harvest or the things that you have to grapple with are a little bit different. And I do feel that Zora, I think we're just starting to scratch the surface, and just like you said, everybody quotes her, but how do we go a little bit deeper and wider in regard to her life, her work, and her legacy? And I just can't imagine. I'm envious of your students. They get to be right there in a Zora space
They do.
and learn about
Love it.
her.
They love it. I mean, one of the things that we do, especially at the beginning of my class, is we go to the Barnard Archives and we look, and the thing is, Barnard does not hold much, right, in terms of Hurston archival information, but that's important to think about, right? So, but we go to the archives, and they're there looking at, forms like her a record of freshman interest, like a form that they also fill out in some form, right? And so that really makes it real that, Hurston was, she was an actual student, right? I mean, we have her transcript, we see how she did, right? And they're always appalled by that their transcripts could be saved in some way, right? There are letters written about her by the administration there because, of scholarship issues and then also issues related to having Black students on campus for the first time, right? They do, right? It is possible for them to connect with her, not just as a literary icon and not just as, this storied African American writer, but like as a student, right? She also had all kinds of, financial aid issues when she was here. She had, social issues in terms of dealing with the elitism of some of the students here. She had some teachers who were really hard on her. She missed an exam. I mean, it's like there were things, in Hurston's life that were just regular student stuff, right? But really heightened by the fact that she was Barnard's first Black student, that she was dealing with, she's first generation low income, right? Which is how we describe some students these days, and really trying her best to get the education that she had been fighting for, right, her whole life.
Yes, yes. And just for our viewers to orient them, Zora's transferring from Howard
Yes,
to Barnard to
yeah,
start school at 34.
exactly.
And I love that piece because I think in our society, and I don't really know when this started, but we are really into having to do things at a certain age. And if you haven't done this at a certain age, right? Like if you haven't laid out your whole life by the time you're 30, you failed. But Zora, like you said, she's so human and all the experiences we had. Your students' fear of someone seeing their transcripts or it being saved. It's now my fear. I had never thought about that. So you can thank them for that. But yes, the financial aid issues and seeing her be in fear that she might not be able to attend Barnard
Mhm.
is so human.
Yeah,
And you think when oh, you're a student and you don't know what your life is going to become, especially because you are trying to overcome all of these trials and tribulations. And then to think Zora still became Zora.
exactly.
She still became Zora. She enrolled in Barnard in 1925,
Mhm.
the fall of 1925. And Their Eyes Are Watching God, which we're talking about, wasn't published until 1937.
Exactly.
That's so significant to me.
So, I remind my students of that, and I also remind my students of the fact that, Toni Morrison, in the Hurston Legacy, Toni Morrison did not start writing until her late 30s, right? And published The Bluest Eye. I think she was, I mean, was she 40 maybe? And then she wins the Nobel Prize. It is never too late. It's just not too late. I mean, Black women do things right on their own time, right? And excellent examples in Hurston and Morrison, right, who had to fight to be full-time writers, both of them, but nevertheless, they did it, And they had to make certain sacrifices, they had to make compromises, they had to be very, very self-assured, but they did it.
They did it. So when we talk about preserving that legacy on campus, we are in a very special time for Barnard and really even for the Harlem Renaissance. Can you
Right.
tell us a little bit about what we have going on to
Sure.
celebrate Zora's legacy, Black students at Barnard?
So in the next 3 years, between 2025 and 2028, we here at Barnard are celebrating the centennial of Hurston's matriculation and graduation from Barnard, which also means that we're celebrating 100 years of Black students at Barnard. Not just celebrating, but recognizing 100 years of Black students at Barnard. We are lucky enough to be kicking this off with the Zora Neale Hurston Summit, organized by Ray Chesney and the Hurston Family Trust. And then we're going to be moving into a series of events and programs and projects and happenings that will help us to investigate not only Hurston's, work and life and legacy, but also really, really thinking about, we always talk about Hurston as Barnard's first Black student. We want to know who the second Black student was. We want to know the third, the fourth, the fifth, right? We want to have a much better sense of the history of Black students at Barnard. In the last couple of years, there have been some excellent student projects related to uncovering, right, what we do know about the history of Black students at Barnard. But we're really trying to bring all of that information together so that we can have a real picture of what Hurston started, right? And what the circumstances around her matriculation and graduation were, right? And then what was made possible, right, for other students and her legacy, and then also what were the pain moments, like what were the pain points, right? How have Barnard Black students been organizing, right, to make their experience here better, to like create change for future students, right, to fight for some of the things that they felt were necessary? How were they a part of, the 1968 protests here at Barnard and Columbia were very big. Black students were involved. How were they involved in the Black Power and civil rights movements, right? That especially locally here in Harlem, like we're interested in all of that information. So we're going to be doing all of these sort of, projects and programs and research to figure that out. And hopefully we end in 2028 with a kind of combination of a Hurston Festival of the Arts, because we really want to, again, celebrate Hurston and her legacy at that moment, but also a celebration of the 100 years of Black students at Barnard, where we're able to put together that timeline, right, and present it to the larger Barnard community, as well as the history of higher ed. So we're interested in that and doing that as well.
First, I have to say, we are so excited at the Trust. This is our inaugural event honoring our beloved Zora. And we get to do it at her alma mater. So we cannot thank you guys enough for your generosity and just the serendipitous alignment for this to happen. It is to me, and of course, I'm very interested in Zora personally. And so it's like you guys are welcoming her home, which I think is really sweet. And on top of that, I was thinking as you were talking, because we were talking before about the students,
Yes.
I just imagine we're doing this in 2025 and we have a children's festival happening on the second day of the summit, so February 1st, 2025. I imagine some of those children who come to the festival and they start learning about Zora may be Barnard students in the future
Absolutely.
because of this experience.
Exactly. And I have a colleague across the street. I think it was my colleague, Robert O'Meally, who holds the Zora Neale Hurston Chair at Columbia. And he mentioned once, I think it was him. He mentioned once that, sometimes people knock on your door as a professor, and you open it up and you never know who that person is going to be. It could be a future student, it could be a future colleague, it could be a future writer, it could be a future critic, right? So in some ways, like you just always, as a professor, right, and especially as a professor who sits here in the space that Hurston occupied, I'm really interested in the fact that we introduce Hurston to young people, right, and we see what happens.
Yes, yes. And so excited for that piece. You know, I'm biased because my son is the children's ambassador. The trustees surprised me with that last year. And he takes his job really serious. And I think, you know, you think of exposure, how much exposure changes things because he hears me talk about Zora all the time. So now he knows Zora facts. And he has asked me, he's like, can I be a Zora scholar? I'm like, sure. Let me hook you up with
Right.
Monica. Let me hook you up with Carla Kaplan so that
Exactly.
kind of see, but even he and Dr. Kendi, because Dr. Kendi is adapting six of Zora's works into children's literature, I
Right.
think it's just such an exciting time. And the fact that she brings with her her time at Barnard and her time participating in the Harlem Renaissance, both as a newbie to both settings.
Exactly.
New to this elite university, she's new to Harlem, period, as a Florida girl.
Right.
And it's so important what you said, and I want to reiterate that the fact that you guys are using this moment to paint a better picture, because I had never thought about that. We always hear who was the first, and then we don't hear anything else. So who else? Who came after? What did they do?
Right.
Because it is just like we look at literary descendants of Zora, such as Alice Walker and Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou. It is significant when we think about the academic side, the artistic side of what one person kind of trailblazing away does and expos the possibilities that it exposes. So now I'm excited to see this. I
Mhm.
pretty much need to move to New York for the next 3 years so I can
You're welcome.
participate.
Because it's the 2020s, right? There's incredible things happening here in the city that are, commemorating 100 years of many, many, many things that happened in the 1920s during the Harlem Renaissance. So it's a good time. It's a good time to be in New York. It's a good time to be um, thinking about the Harlem Renaissance and its legacies, to actually, also be thinking. One of the things I think it was really important, there was a um, Harlem Renaissance art show right at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Harlem Renaissance and Transatlantic Modernism that happened last year. And every time we get a chance to kind of revisit some of these moments, like we revisit Hurston's graduation and matriculation, we revisit, right, the beginnings of the Harlem Renaissance in both literature and art. Um, we're just able to see things differently, right? We're able to get a different picture. We're able to get sometimes a more nuanced picture, right? We're able to emphasize some things and look at them with a different perspective and eye. So I'm really excited about this next couple of years here, particularly at Barnard, because I think we'll learn a lot. We'll learn a lot, not just more about Hurston, because there's so much more to learn, because there's so much we don't know still. More about, how she approached her work, how she negotiated, right? How she negotiated the difficult moments in her life, right? How she remained, independent and yet patronized, right, by her benefactor during the Harlem Renaissance. Like how she, negotiated very difficult moments at the end of her life when she was having trouble being published, when her books were out of print, right? There's so much we can learn about, I could say, if I'm being most positive, about resilience, right? But I can also say how much we're going to learn about, you know, how that's sometimes not enough, right? How it's just not enough, right? I mean, there are things that happen to people, right? There are people that are disadvantaged, right, in terms of, racial hierarchy or economic ability. Resilience sometimes is not enough, right? So we'll learn more about that. We'll just also learn more about, Hurston and the Renaissance. We'll learn more about all of the other writers and hopefully the relationship she had with them, in addition to like the second, third, the fourth, the fifth Black Barnard student, right? And what their contributions were, right? To, we have one alum who is a filmmaker, and she is investigating a recent history of Black Barnard artists. But she started with that project, but then as she kept going, she ran into a whole group of Black women who were really active in the civil rights movement when they were here on Barnard's campus. So, now there's a subsection of her film that's about that, right? So we're just learning so much, right, about not just Hurston's legacy, but the legacy of Black women in her wake, right? And their effect here locally on campus, in the city, right? And then sometimes in the world, right? When we think of Ntozake Shange, we think of Edwidge Danticat, we think of some of these other Black women writers, right? So there are so many. So we're just so lucky to be doing this work.
First, I want to give you guys some kudos because I think it would be easy to sanitize the experiences and the reality of the experiences that Zora and even some of the subsequent, many of the subsequent students of color, even when you get into those who are students who are immigrants, right? What has their experience been? And it's so funny because, of course, I'm always connecting everything to Zora, whether I want to or not. But I think that even having the conversations are a part of her legacy. My favorite quote by her is research is formalized curiosity is poking and prying with purpose, but to use Barnard, to be in this space and this place and this time and to say we are going to explore and be
Mhm.
open and not kind of shy away. We're not going to flinch at the parts that we need to talk about that are less than favorable, right? Because it is all part of the history. And I think like that has some anthropological elements
Yes, it
into
absolutely
it.
does.
Zora would definitely be smiling ear to ear, just knowing that this is happening. I have this theory that oftentimes, especially when we talk about Black women in history, the ones whose names aren't written down, we call them Zora. So when we're calling her name, we're also honoring them. But you guys are like, let's go find these names and let's go make sure these names in the future aren't lost. You had spoken earlier about you not having a lot of Zora's
Mhm.
uh, archival material
Right.
in the Barner archive. And one of our guests who will be there at the summit is Dr. Irma McLaurin.
Mhm. Exactly.
Yeah,
Hmm.
the creator of the Black Feminist Archive, and she
Right.
just got an endowment at UMass to start the physical archive. And so we talk about Zora being Zora, and she still was subjected to the erasure.
Exactly.
Even as I'm like, okay, let's find some more stuff because so much of her prolific body of work was in other people's archives. She
Right.
wasn't even considered significant enough for her to have.
For having her own archive. Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
I mean, I think I was supposed to take a nap before the summit happened, one big nap, go on vacation or something, because of course it's been busy. I
Yeah.
think Zora, I like to tell people she was loud when she was here. She is definitely loud as an ancestor. And so I think she
Very
heard
true.
that we're having a party and
Uh-huh.
we're
Oh, that's
bursting.
right. No, of course. Mhm.
She's like, let's have this party. And there's so much interest and excitement around her and 100 years, the centennial of Black students at Barnard, that I think is just fertile ground. Going back to that garden
Yeah.
analogy, it's just
Right.
fertile ground. So I think we better put our hats on and hold on to
So
them.
too. I think so. But that's so great. I know that I mean, I've been at Barnard for 25 years, so some of my students who are now, full-fledged adults, right? Who are, former students who are Barnard alums, right? Current students are excited. We just there's an incredible amount of excitement for this work, for the summit in particular. Like the thing that's really exciting to me about the summit um, is that it's open to the public, right? I mean, so often we would do something here at Barnard that would be, much more academic and for our own, community alone. But I'm so happy, right, that the summit is going to be open to everyone, right? And that we're going to be welcoming people into Barnard, into Hurston's legacy, right? In this way, right, with the family. I think that's in some ways the perfect opening, right? Because it's an opening for everyone, and that really I think it makes sense, right? Given what we know about her.
Yes, yes. Have I told you my pitch for the summit that
Yeah,
I have 4 or 5 meetings a day?
yeah.
Where I
Tell me,
so I got it
pitch
down
me.
now.
I'm
So
going to say yes, but you can pitch me.
So I pitched the Zora Neale Hurston Summit as an upscale family reunion where the general public gets to come be a part of Zora's extended family for a weekend. And for the first time in history, we'll be able to celebrate the life, legacy, and work of Zora Neale Hurston alongside the Hurston family themselves.
There you go.
Yeah, like the family thing.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, and I mean, my mind has been blown with how much and how many ways people want to celebrate Zora, the generosity to give her her flowers and to take their gifts. You know, we think about the upscale family reunion, it works really well because I
Yeah.
often say it's a potluck of gifts, talents, ideas, resources. And that's really, I think, how Zora would have done it, in this way when you think
It
about
would
her.
have been like, that really nice. I mean, she has this one line at the end of I think it's in Mules and Men where she talks about just wanting to throw a barbecue in heaven.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Somebody playing a guitar, somebody playing a harmonica, and she's in the middle telling stories. And there are so many stories that are going to come out of this. I probably will cry the whole time because it'll be beautiful to see just her family. So many people, like you said, there was a woman in your class who had been holding Zora's book since she was a baby.
Yep.
And now I'm grown enough to study her and to explore her more in depth. National Black Theater is coming and doing
Exactly. No,
a
really excited about
celebration.
that.
Library of Congress is coming. I'm like, wait a
Very excited. Very excited. Also,
Yeah,
the art exhibition, right?
my goodness. Yes, we have an art exhibition of Africa Town focused on Zora's fieldwork right out of Barnard and Columbia. Her first field tour in 1927. And then we have Dr. Deborah G. Plant
Yep.
talking about
The book.
Barracuda.
Yep.
Yeah, she's the one who edited. And oh, you know what, Monica? We have to tell them. Zora's next book is coming out on her
That's
birthday.
right. That's right.
Yeah, so The Life of Harriet, she spent what, 14 years working on
Yep.
this?
Mhm.
I can't lie, once we get into the Harriet and the politics, I'm like, ooh, Zora, you got some other scholars who can
I know.
grab
I think we're going to read it. We're going to read it in my class, but that won't start. I mean, the class is after the summit.
on.
We're
Okay.
going to have to wait for how it goes.
Yeah, and I think I was just
Complicated.
talking to our book club administrator yesterday because he wants to do something with the Life of Harriet at the summit. And
Mhm.
we were also talking about what we need to do after the summit because it'll come out January 7th,
Right.
2025. And so it's a 368 page book. I've
Has to
been,
be.
yeah, I've been spoiled to start reading it.
Oh, you have.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, good.
I got some perks. I got
Absolutely. Good
It
for
is.
you.
It's magnificent. And
Uh-huh.
Dr. Plant is editing. She edited Barracoon as well.
Right.
And it's there are so many things that are coming together and so many things that are blooming and beginning.
Yep.
That garden analogy, that is it.
Hmm. It's true.
That is it. So I have to surprise you and ask you a question
Okay.
that I wasn't going to ask.
Mhm.
But you mentioned the Met. And I
Oh,
Renaissance exhibit that was there. And I'm
yes,
sure everyone must be asking you about this at this
we are.
point. But you're taking Zora to the Met in a
I
very
am.
special way.
I am. So one of the inspirations for the organization of Superfine Tailoring Black Style, which I'm guest curating at the Met, is Hurston's 1934 essay, The Characteristics of Negro Expression. And that essay, it's not an easy essay, right? And it really comes out of her field work. But what I was so interested in that essay is this idea of expression, right? And one of the ways that she talks about one of the characteristics is the will to adorn, right? And when she talks about the will to adorn, she says, Black people can never get enough of beauty, right? And that they pile beauty upon beauty upon beauty. So I had been thinking, I mean, I always think about that when, as somebody who also studies fashion and dress. But then I sort of really started studying that essay with the curatorial team at the Met and really thought, let's think about how the essay has 12 different characteristics of Negro expression. So we said, well, what can we think about? Can we think of 12 categories or expressions, right, of Black dandyism that we can think about animating this exhibition? That was the inspiration. And one of the things that I keep in mind from that essay all the time is the way that Hurston talks about wit, right? there's so much about wit in that essay that she says is really valued in African American culture. Signifying, right? It's so much a part of it. She talks about the double descriptive, right? So we keep thinking about the ways in which we're thinking about objects, dress objects and or fashion objects and other objects, the ways in which they're describing the same thing in different ways, right? So the essay has been really, really generative, right, for thinking about the ways in which Black people express themselves, right, both verbally and bodily, right? So that's one of the things that we're trying to import into the exhibition.
So first I have to ask, how do you calmly say that? I'm guest curating.
I'm getting more and more used to it. I'm trying.
Okay.
I'm trying.
You
You
tried it
know,
on for size.
you
It's
got to
still
say it to
good.
be it, right?
Very, very true. I mean, congratulations. I can't
Thank
say it
you.
enough because
Exciting.
it's just magnificent when we think of the history of Black fashion. I mean, Black culture, period.
It's
It just,
exciting. There's a lot to say, and
yeah,
the exhibition is in no way definitive, but
no.
we want to give people, a way in,
Hmm.
right? We want them to wander,
Yeah.
right? I mean, through the historical and the thematic narratives, and then we want to kind of send people out thinking, right, about the relationship between, fashion, dress, race, gender, class, power, right? So, and everything from, what it means to be dressed, right, to actually not have a lot of agency in terms of what you wear, to just like absolutely styling out, to like taking that agency and you know, showing it, right? Showing it for yourself sometimes. Sometimes it's very personal, right? Or also, what it means sometimes to actually, to dress for an audience, right? So we're really hoping that that everyone will find something, right, that they connect to within the exhibition.
And I love that. I know it'll be a conversation starter because it's just like the summit, just like the 100-year centennial. It is just the start of a really big
Good.
conversation.
Exactly.
But I love the fact I'm like picturing Zora at the exhibit because she talking about beauty on beauty. I think it's Coco Chanel who says every time you walk out the house, take
Take
one
one thing off.
yeah. Zora's like, put some more on.
Exactly. Every time you get close to the house, put one more thing on.
Yeah, put one more thing on, and I
Yeah.
love it. And so your book inspired this whole exhibit.
Yes.
Am I
Yes.
right?
Yes,
Tell
it
us
did.
about your book.
So my book, Slaves to Fashion, is a cultural history of Black dandyism that is precisely thinking about what I just said in terms of like how Black people have used fashion and dress to think about themselves and their political possibilities, like to think through and beyond boundaries that are related to race, to class, to sexuality, right, to nationality in some ways, right. So I published this book a long time ago, so I was really surprised and honored, right, when the Costume Institute contacted me and said, we read your book and we're thinking that we might want to do an exhibition. I was very, very honored, and I'm very excited to be working on
That is fantastic. And I think this ties to something we were talking about earlier about what age you start something or you
it.
do something.
Exactly.
This was 2009, right? That it was
Yeah, the
published.
book was published in 2009, and I started it. It started its earliest version. I said this the other day. The first chapter, when it was my dissertation, I wrote that first chapter in like the fall or spring of 1996, 97.
What?
Yeah, I mean, like the draft, many
Yeah.
things changed, but it was my dissertation, and then it became my first book, and then yeah, so never too
I'll
late.
have to get my copy and get it signed because that's a good reminder, and I think that is very Zora-esque as well. Like she would just do the work. Sometimes she wouldn't know if anything would come of it. We think of Barracoon. She started collecting in 1927. The book was
Exactly,
published in 2018. She wasn't even here to
exactly.
see it.
I know.
And so yes, I'm super excited. It opens in May, right?
Yes,
The
it
exhibit?
opens to the public, I think, on May 8th or 10th, I think. Yeah,
We'll have to look up the dates and make sure everyone knows because, yeah, we got to get dressed in honor of of the exhibit.
absolutely. Mhm.
So, Monica, I have one final question for you, and it is, why do you think Zora's legacy persist?
Well, that's a big question, but I think it's so related to everything we've been talking about today. I think her legacy persists because if we read her biographies, maybe not her autobiography, but if we read her biographies, we know and we learn that Hurston was, and I say this to my students all the time, she was extraordinary. And what I mean, and I put those together, extra slash ordinary. She's completely ordinary in so many ways, right? She lived a regular life in terms of the ways that she struggled, in terms of the ways that she had to work very hard to get the things that she that to get opportunities for herself. She worked very hard to do all that. She struggled, right? So she's absolutely ordinary in terms of some of the things that she faced. She's also extraordinary in that she had a conviction from being very young child, right, of the fact that she had something to say, right, and she had something to say that she felt like the world needed to know, right, and she really knew that about herself, which is, I think, why she was willing to put in the work to keep up the struggle, to keep trying to make her, to create opportunities for herself, to make it from Florida to DC to New York to all the other places that she went, US and abroad, right? To do the traveling that she did, to be that kind of cosmopolitan person. So she's extraordinary, right? I mean, there's something there that she believed in about herself, and then she's completely relatable, even in terms of, sometimes I think about the incredible friendship and then also kind of breakup, right, that she has with Langston Hughes. All of that is relatable. Their love for each other is completely relatable. You see when you read their letters between each other how much they loved and admired each other and relied on each other as both friends and collaborators. And then when they fell out, they both behaved badly. And it's completely relatable, the terms under which they sort of fell out and spoke to each other. Completely relatable. So it's this extraordinary that I think is really where her legacy, why it's so powerful.
Yes, and I love that you touched on that. I think we often put our historical figures on an altar and expect perfection out of them. But Zora shows you at every turn that she was relatable,
Yeah,
capable of behaving badly,
very
aka
much
being
so.
very petty.
Yeah, very petty, but also so incredibly generous, right?
Yes, I just
Unbelievably
read a
generous.
letter. I just read a letter this past week that she wrote to Alan Lomax.
Hmm.
And she was telling him in the letter, I can tell you how fantastic I think you are. In fact, I could cuss you out. She said, cuss you out and not have any feelings after about it, or not have my feelings changed after about it. And so, yes, I mean, of course, we could talk forever about Zora. I'm excited to experience all that Barnard has planned for her, all that New York has planned for her, all that the world has planned for her. And I'll say all that she has planned for herself as we move into this very special year of 2025 and beyond. So,
Yep.
Monica, thank you for keeping Zora's legacy alive. Thank you for wielding your own legacy so that we can learn from you and experience the beauty of your body of work. And it's always an honor to be in conversation with you.
Thank you, Ray. It's so, so good to talk to you too. And I'm really excited about the summit and having you all come here.